Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. Today I'm reviewing The Current War. This was directed by Alfonso Gomez Rejon and stars Benedict Cumberbatch, Michael Shannon, Tom Holland, Nicholas Hoult and Katherine Waterston. The film is really focused on the epic story of the cutthroat competition between the greatest inventors of the industrial age over whose electrical system would power the next generation. Backed by J.P. Morgan, Edison dazzles the world by lightning Manhattan. But Westinghouse, aided by Nikola Tesla, has seen fatal flaws in Edison's direct current design. Igniting a war of currents, Westinghouse and Tesla bet everything on a risky and dangerous alternating current. Look, I thought this was a solid film and an interesting story. It was a story I hadn't really heard before. I've heard bits and pieces. Obviously I know who Edison is and Westinghouse and Tesla. I know who these people are. But I didn't really know there was a war between them at the time that they came up with this idea of electricity and how to light up cities with all these wires underground. So that aspect of the film was really fascinating to see. I think Benedict Cumberbatch is really good. It's the best I've seen him in a while, and he plays Edison quite convincingly. I think Michael Shannon's great, probably one of the best roles he's done in quite some time as well as Westinghouse. I think he's a really brilliant actor, and he brings a uniqueness to this sort of role, and this sort of a man that's kind of haunted a little bit by his past and doesn't like to be wronged by people. Nicholas Hoult, I think, does a great job as Tesla. He's a character I wanted to know a lot more about. Yes, he's in the film, but he's not the main focus, and he isn't in a lot of the movie. And he was the part I was most interested in because I didn't really know much about Tesla. I knew that he came up with certain ideas, but I wanted to see him portrayed on screen. I wanted to see who he was as a person and what he was, and the genius he was and what he tried to accomplish. This, to me, would have been a much more interesting story if they focused on him a bit more. Not taking away from the Edison-Westinghouse storylines, they were very interesting, and you got to see behind the scenes with these particular characters and the families that they had, and how both of them had really strong women that sort of were the only person they really trusted and the only person that they could ask for advice or talk to, and they would give what they thought of the matter and what they thought their particular husband should do. And I liked that. I thought that was a really interesting way to show these really strong female characters. I liked mostly how it's shot. It's kind of beautifully shot. There's this thing I've been noticing with some films where they're starting to shoot movies where most of the scenes take place in the bottom half of the frame. There's this whole big gap above their head, and I just don't quite know why they're doing it like that. It just feels like a lot of dead space, and it just feels really strange the way they film it. And throughout this film, they try and use the camera in different ways and trying to get different shots and uniqueness with it, because it's a story that's solid, but it isn't spectacular. It isn't like a story that has you on the edge of your seat. So they try and use the camera to tell that story in a unique and different way, which I thought worked ultimately pretty well, except for obviously the big gap above their heads. There was incidents you learnt throughout the film that sort of added to the story, which were interesting things I didn't quite know. And I just got immersed in it pretty much because I like the idea of geniuses and inventors coming up with things and how they come up with things and how they try and accomplish things, but sometimes they're not really focused on money or not focused on doing anything to hurt others. They just want to improve society. They just want to add things to the world to help it make it a better place. And that's what the film sort of focuses on. It looks at the idea of how they came up with the original idea for the electric chair, and how everything they came up with ultimately was used later to create electricity throughout people's homes where they didn't have to use candles anymore. And they were the beginning of it all. And they were big visionaries in that regard. And I liked that. I thought that was an interesting look at a part of history I didn't know a lot about, but these guys were fantastic, and it was interesting what they were able to come up with and accomplish in that particular time that they were around. I think it's a film that ultimately may have done better or would be more suited to maybe Netflix or a miniseries or something like that. Because it just felt like even though it was a solid film, it just felt like the story wasn't something that needed to be shown on the big screen, I didn't think. It didn't add much to it or anything like that. But it just felt like it was a simple story that could be effective on a smaller screen, I guess you could say. And like I said, they didn't focus enough on Tesla. I would love a whole movie about Tesla because I find him such a fascinating guy. Such a visionary, had so many brilliant ideas, but ultimately he died alone and poor. But he came up with so many brilliant ideas. And he had it all in his head. He didn't need to write it down or build it per se, but he could work it all out in his head, so he knew it would work. And there were times he was able to execute that and show how he could use it to work it. But I just felt the idea he had with electricity without wires would have been interesting to see if it did develop, if he was able to develop the way he wanted to do it. And I think another negative with this film is the fact that it was made for people who knew who these guys were and knew these events that took place, because dates and places kept popping up on the screen to tell you a particular time and place, like the World's Fair, that something took place, and a variety of other things. But I didn't have a connection to this and understanding of these particular events, so it didn't really have the impact on me, I think, that they wanted to have a particular event. But overall, it was a solid movie, and it was definitely worth a watch. And like I said, I'm still trying to go to the cinema, which is kind of scary at times, but at this point there's not many people there now. There's only 3 of us in this screening, so it's positive in a way because I like the idea of not a lot of people around, but it's a negative that you're fearful of going into the cinema because you don't want to ultimately get sick if someone hasn't. Final thoughts. At the heart, it's really about what it takes to be an inventor, and how there is competition sometimes, and how you work really hard at accomplishing something, and then someone takes your idea, or they take a part of the idea and to form their own thing, and then it just gets out of control, and then they're just battling each other. Looks at how the lengths that people go to accomplish things. I'm going to give The Current War 3.5 out of 5. I thought it was a solid movie, really great performances, an interesting story, and it was just well put together, and I did like many aspects of this particular film. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit subscribe down the bottom. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.